This is the Global Podcast Network, where executives and professionals connect, share, and inspire. Stay tuned for the conversations that drive success.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Our next guest brings a lot of understanding to many different areas, and they are a dually licensed marriage and family therapist, professional clinical counselor, award-winning documentary director, and has worked with many people in understanding different lifestyles, different situations. We're going to welcome him back in here and go deep with a lot today in terms of things that many of us have always wanted to ask. Ethan Levy is on the program. How are you doing today?
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thanks for asking. I'm really excited to be here and to be connecting with you and the audience. So thank you so much for having me.
I've heard you before describe who you are, and if you would, I would love you to do that so that our audience can become more familiar with you. Could you do that?
Absolutely. And maybe while I'm doing that, I can even give more explanation as to what my identities mean for maybe folks who aren't more familiar with some of the terms. Does that work?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. So yeah, my name is Van. My pronoun series is they, and for those who speak Spanish, ella. And a big reason that I have ella there is to indicate two things. Is one, that I do speak Spanish, as well as so folks who are speaking Spanish to me know which pronoun series to use. I'm somebody who's trans, and what that means for folks who don't know is that the gender marker I was assigned at birth does not align with the identity that I am, and I am non-binary. And what that means for folks who don't know is we live in a world where there's two identities, right? Binary meaning two. And the folks that people are familiar with are male and female. That doesn't mean that those are the only identities that exist. Those are just the only identities that are uplifted in our society. And I've never felt like somebody who wants to perform what it means to be male or female. I like to show up in this world in a way that feels authentic. And the most authentic way for me to show up is non-binary. And so it's really important to remember that somebody's non-binary identity is unique to the individual. It's not a copy paste, one definition fits all. It's the same example. If we ask 100 women, what does it mean to be a woman? You're going to get 100 different answers because our identities are so unique to ourselves. So I'm trans, I'm non-binary, I'm autistic. Another big reason why I share about this is we live in a world that caters to people that might be labeled as allistic or neurotypical. Allistic means not autistic. Neurotypical means somebody who is not neurodivergent. And I share this because so often am I misread by the way my face moves or the way I respond or being direct. We live in a world where the rules are so confusing. If somebody asks you how you are, the anticipation is somebody's going to say, I'm great or I'm okay. But when you ask somebody who hasn't been taught those rules, how are you? You're going to get potentially more of a genuine response of what's really going on. I missed the bus. My hair wouldn't do what it wanted. My tag is itching my skin, whatever it might be. And these are some of the reasons why I bring forward some of these identities. I'm also Latinx. I'm also Egyptian. I also have chronic illness and constant agonizing pain. And again, I bring these to our awareness because so often do people have this idea that somebody who's disabled or in chronic agonizing pain 24/7 is not capable, when in reality, that can be different for every single human being. And so those are a bit about my identities. I'm, as you shared, a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as a licensed professional clinical counselor. So I'm what would be called a psychotherapist who also supervises people who are pre-licensed or working towards their licensure as future therapists. In addition, I've written a book, I've made an app, I've put on, at least to my knowledge, the first ever of its kind, an international virtual conference where every single presenter is not cis, as well as they are paid. And that's another term. So what cis means is that if somebody's identity aligns with what the marker they were assigned at birth, that person would be cis. So cis means one and the same. If somebody was assigned male at birth and their identity is male, they are cis. And so that conference we put on, where it's not just about learn about trans and non-binary people, it's learn about depression, learn about how to support folks in different ways while being inclusive of these identities, not just how to work with people who are trans and non-binary. I also made a documentary, which is a call to action, along with many other things that aren't coming to my mind right now. But that's just a little bit more about me and some of the work I did
Oh,
or
thank you
have.
for that. Yeah, and just understanding, different terms, and just understanding in general. The term transition has come up before, and some say that it's transphobic. Can you define that and give us a better read on that?
Absolutely. So the term transition comes from the medical model. And what that means is that we live in a world that has dictated in order to be male, in order to be female, you need to perform in these ways, or you need to have these genitalia or these attributes. But if we think about it, there are plenty of cis men who can't grow a beard, and there are plenty of cis women who can grow a beard, right? So having a beard is not specific to any identity, it's
Hmm.
just what we've connected. And so the reason that the term transition is transphobic. The reason that the term transition is transphobic is because it's communicating something that is actually not is not true. Sorry, let me rephrase that again. If we think about the word transition, it goes from one state to another. If I'm alive and I'm dead, I've transitioned from a living state to a dead state. As a trans person, I have not transitioned from being female to being non binary. I've always been non binary. It's the world that didn't see me for being non binary, and it's myself for not having access to awareness and language to understand that I am non binary. So I've never transitioned. I've always been who I am. And that's why it is a term that is transphobic because it's so deeply connected into what you have to do in order to be who you are, when in reality, a penis is not male, a vagina is not female. These are just these are just body parts that anybody could have. And so, really removing this idea to be who you are and who you want to be, you have to do X, Y, and Z.
What about the term straight? Your thoughts on that? Is that an acceptable term?
So that term is deeply rooted in homophobia. So if we think about the word straight, and any word that differs from that is going to be inferior, crooked, bent, zigzag, right? These all words are inferior to straight, and so it's prioritizing heterosexuality over any other identity versus just using the term heterosexuality or heterosexual or hetero, instead of perpetuating that unconscious bias that folks who are hetero are superior to any other sexuality.
Um, Tell me about the documentary. We've never touched upon that. We've mentioned it, but we didn't go into any depth. Can we go there?
Absolutely, thank you. So I wanted to interview different folks, asking them only two questions. And it's not like I ask a question and they give a response. It's folks film themselves. They had up to 5 minutes to respond to each question. And the question was, what's the most affirmed you've ever felt in your identity? And what are some harmful, violent, terrible experiences you've had just for being who you are? And it's not like I would share one and then you'd see me sharing the other. It's very much maybe like I shared my best, somebody else shared their worst, but everybody's response is in the documentary because we wanted to show the world a reality of what it's like to exist navigating the world, even just for a millisecond of that roller coaster of how dysregulating and how horrific it is of what we experience just for literally existing versus how basic it is to affirm us, use our pronouns, use our names, something that cis people have automatically get defaulted to. And so the documentary is a call to action to not only like bring an awareness of what this is, but hopefully give folks things that they can take from it, of shifts that they can make and potentially help educate others in their lives to make this world safer for us. Well, actually, sorry, I think that's it. um, I'm so sorry today. My
No
brain
worries.
isn't working.
For
Let
you,
me.
what I mean, do you want to talk more about the documentary?
I want to touch a little more. Can I have just a second to take a breath for a moment?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's mostly it, is that, it's a documentary based of call to action of real people's realities and inviting folks on shifts that can be made to make this world safer, but also bringing an awareness of how what people get as something that's so basic and take for granted could literally be life-saving for people, could mean the difference between somebody considering dying by suicide versus somebody potentially living, thriving, and trusting themselves more.
What would you feel was a major turning point in your life? When you look back, at your timeline, what was one of the most impactful moments and or changes in your journey?
I think having people show up for me and advocate to the people in my life. I remember my chosen family had shared with my bio family, because at the time I didn't have familiarity with language or understanding of what it meant to be non-binary. So I only knew male, female, and I knew I wasn't female. So my focus is that I must be male. And they said, would you rather bury a daughter or have a happy, thriving, living son? And so just having people actually show up and validate that I'm not crazy, I'm not mentally ill, because that's the way that I have been treated for my entire adolescence and early adulthood. I would say that it wasn't really into like my mid 30s when I started to really trust that I'm not mentally ill. This is not a mental illness, even though a large part of me knew that. And I would never assume anybody else with these identities are mentally ill, but just how much is being reinforced in the media with the people who I had chosen in my life, with different family members. And so having people advocate for me, but help me better integrate that I know more than anybody will ever know about who I am.
Mhm.
And other people's opinions about my reality don't matter because they don't live in my body and in my brain.
I'm glad you said that. And for me, there was a wake up in that much of what you just said. Nobody will know you better than you. Nobody will love you better than you. Nobody will understand you better than you. I don't care who's around you. That's just the way it is. Nobody will take care of you better than you. Unfortunately, many of us don't know that, or we haven't figured that out yet. And we reach to outside sources to make us feel better, and there's nothing wrong with having people around you support you. But when it comes down to it, you're it, I'm it. And I don't think a lot of people realize that.
And I think that there's so much overcoupling with the reverse order of things, right? So there was a time where there, and still people believe that, oh, you are part of the LGBT plus community because you experienced sexual violence when you were younger at some point. But the reality is that our community is more susceptible to experience sexual violence because there's such limited visibility and awareness. So when we find somebody who might accept us for who we are, and we haven't learned that you can't just trust anybody, it makes it easier for somebody to engage in harm towards us because we're human, because we want connection, because these are things that majority of humans need.
You mentioned before about awareness about the mental situation and mental health in general. What do you want mental providers to know overall based on what we're talking about today?
I think there's a lot of misconception that mental health disorders and illnesses um, exist because somebody's born that way, because they are trans, because they're part of the LGBT plus community, without looking at systematic oppression and violence that people experience every single day. When you turn on the TV, you're most likely going to see hetero folks, cis folks. When you go to the doctors, the images, the magazines, all of that. And so it's this constant representation of erasure and you don't exist. And so of course, I'm going to be depressed. Of course, I'm going to feel anxious leaving the home if I'm going to be misgendered, mispronoun targeted, all these things that look like mental health disorders, when in reality, these are natural responses to what's existing. And there's so much overdiagnosis and misdiagnosis. Take, for example, borderline personality disorder. So often are trans people labeled that when in reality, we live in a world that invalidates who we are, in a body that invalidates who we are. Of course, we're going to be dysregulated. And then if you look at the criteria for borderline personality disorder, a lot of the criteria is going to look very similar to a lot of responses. But if you take somebody who's cishet and you treat them the way that you treat a trans person, and you treat somebody who's part of the LGBT plus community, they're going to have the same responses, because constantly it's You don't know who you are. I know who you are better than you are. You're not going to change my mind. I have power over you. I could potentially physically or sexually harm you. And you need to be okay with that. And this is your fault, right? These are the things that we're being told constantly, not directly, but with the indirect messaging. Even things like you don't deserve to use the restroom by not having a restroom that's accessible to anybody or to everybody.
I've often heard too from mental health professionals that borderline personality disorder is actually or often thrown out there when they're not really sure. They're not really sure, what the diagnosis could be, should be, would be. So it's just they throw that out, and that's we needed to say something, but that doesn't necessarily mean what somebody is or what they're challenged by. How do you how can you help others? I know that if I'm correct here, that you have a team that can offer therapy, understanding. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so there's actually a lot of different areas. So in my private practice, I have three associates who provide therapy. As a director of behavioral health at Trans Health and Wellness Center, I believe we have about 12 therapists who provide free therapy to anybody in California. We do have a wait list. And then at DoSomethingIdentities.org, we have a national provider list of therapists in every single state who agree to write letters for people to gain access to hormones, surgery, and more medical care in just one session. And so those are kind of the different ways in which we're doing our best to put out there as much as we can. So most licenses are limited to the state. So mine is limited to California. So there's only so much I could do for folks as long as they're in California. But once it's outside, that's where that no more gatekeeping national provider list came into play because I wanted to be able to connect folks who are outside of where I can practice.
Who would that therapy be best for? Like, somebody's wondering if that's me. How would you describe who that person would be?
So honestly, at the end of the day, I think all humans should go to therapy. The reality is that
Mm.
here is 50 to 60 minutes or however long it is where somebody is dedicated to or supposed to be dedicated to listening to you and to validating your reality. Right? How often do we actually get that? When we connect with friends and family, there's always a focus of solution or a back and forth, but there isn't that space or even being questioned. Are you sure it happened that way? Or were you doing what you normally do? Or were you being difficult again? Whereas in therapy, it's supposed to be a place for you to be able to process and have a space just for you and not having to hold anything for the therapist. Not how you're not supposed to worry about how your therapist is feeling. In addition to that, I think it's really important for our community to go to therapy and hopefully find a therapist who's going to validate your reality. So when you have a family member who says, well, of course you got beat up, you shouldn't have gone out with a dress, what do you think is going to happen? Versus a therapist of that's extremely awful and that is deeply transphobic and it's shitty that this is the reality that you have to navigate and it's not fair that you have to make a choice between your safety or showing up for yourself because both are going to have potential risks, right? You have the potential risks of experiencing harm, but not showing up for who you are and constantly having to hide and suppress that is going to directly impact your sense of self, your trust in self, and your self-esteem.
Can you take us? Every situation is different. It's very personalized. But what are some of the starting points and the journey of somebody going for therapy in the area that we're talking about? Can you walk us through that journey? I mean, some people are afraid. I don't want to go back to my past. I don't want to go, deep into that and talk about those kind of things. Is that needed? Just broadly. And and I agree with you. Everybody should go to therapy. And thankfully, nowadays, people are proud to say they're going to talk with their therapist. Like 20, 30 years ago, if you said that, you would be looked at like, oh, they have something wrong with them. Now it's like, hey, I'd love to catch up with you. But I got a therapy appointment. So, I'll text you when I'm free. It's all good. But walk us through that journey, from the beginning when somebody might meet with you. What are some of the things that might take place to help them?
So, at least for me and how I train my team, is that the focus of therapy is what the client wants. So, a lot of the time, clients might come in and say, I don't want to feel so bad, right? That's so vague. So let's hone in on what does that mean? What does feeling bad mean? What would the labels for questions are like the miracle question of what would be different if you weren't feeling bad? What would change if you weren't feeling bad? And really helping the person hone in on specifically what it is that they want to focus on. Maybe somebody wants to focus on increasing coping skills, so to potentially reduce feeling dysregulated when they're being misgendered, or whatever it might be. And then collaboratively working with the person by understanding what have you tried, what has worked, what didn't work, why it didn't work, and collaboratively creating a treatment plan. I was once told this, and this is what helps me visualize, is that my role as a therapist is that I'm walking down a dark path with you holding the light. And when we see forks in the road, I'm going to show you every single fork that I'm aware of and explore with you the potentiality of going down them, the risks, the benefits. And then I'm going to follow you with that light. But I'm not going to tell you which one to go to. I'm not going to prioritize what I think is best for you. Because at the end of the day, I don't live in your head. I don't have your experiences. I don't have access to the tools and the growth edges that you have. I'm just here to help support you make the best decision for yourself, and to hopefully integrate, to learn to trust yourself, and to be able to do that for yourself.
I love that. And I love that visual, excuse me, of walking the path and just shining the light. Now you have a fork in the road, and it's not your job to tell somebody what to do, just to shine the light. I don't know if I ever told you, I'm in a men's group, been doing it for about a year and a half. Very impactful. We do shadow work, community service, leadership, and all of that. There's one thing we never do, and that's give advice. And when somebody, if somebody's, explaining a situation and somebody else says, well, you might want to, we actually correct it. We don't give advice. And it sounds like that's where you're coming from, where you're just giving options, you're giving insight, and it's up to the individual to make that decision what direction they want to go in. Does that sound right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of loops into that what people use the buzzword of trauma informed. The reality is, to be trauma informed, you have to be able to be aware of every trauma that's impacted your client systematically, all of that. And there's no way to know that. So if I'm giving advice, I might not know that maybe that is really harmful and triggering of past trauma, versus asking curious questions. Let's say that I really wanted, not that this would be relevant in therapy, but like I really wanted you to eat apples. I thought that it was going to make a big difference in your life. I'm going to ask you, have you tried eating apples? What was that like for you? What worked? What didn't work? So in terms of therapy, I'm going to ask, have you tried using boxed breathing technique? If the answer is yes, how was that? Was it supportive to you? And if the answer is no, what didn't work about it? I would ask for consent. Could we try it together to hone in on what isn't working as potential information, so that we know maybe what not to try in the future, but also see if there's anything that maybe did work a little bit, to kind of help us brainstorm collaboratively to try different coping skills.
Well, that I think that's beautiful. You're not saying, I think you should try box breathing techniques. I think, you should try apples. No, you're just asking, have you ever? And then that makes the other person think, like, I never thought of that. I've never had apples before. Oh, why was that off my radar? I heard they're good, but what's the best way to connect with you?
Through my website at vanethanlevy.com. And then all the other work that I've mentioned is linked from that page. It's in my bio. So yeah, I think the website's going to be the best, vanethanlevy.com.
Awesome. There's a lot of great resources on the website as well. Lots of answers to questions too. Thank you for being here today, shining the light on all of this, and looking forward next time we get together.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. We'll be right back.
This is the Global Podcast Network, where executives and professionals connect, share, and inspire. Stay tuned for the conversations that drive success.